The phone rang at 2:47 in the morning, and I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. I hadn't heard that ringtone, the old emergency one I'd never bothered to change, in 3 years. Not since the divorce. Not since Daniel packed his last box and told me, without looking at me, that he'd found something real with a woman named Vanessa. But the screen said, Daniel, hospital, and something in my chest went cold before I even answered. Ma'am, this is St. Mercy Medical Center. You're listed as the emergency contact for Daniel Reyes. I sat straight up in bed. I'm his ex-wife. He should have updated that years ago. He never did, the nurse said, and that one sentence would end up meaning more than I could have imagined that night. I drove to the hospital telling myself I was only going because I still had his mother's number saved, because someone needed to know, because I wasn't the kind of person who could hear cardiac event and go back to sleep. That's what I told myself. It wasn't the whole truth. When I walked into the ICU waiting room, Vanessa was already there. Mascara streaked down her face, phone shaking in her hand. She looked up at me like she didn't understand why I existed. They called you? She said. Why would they call you? I didn't have an answer yet, but I would. A doctor came out 20 minutes later and asked for the emergency contact. Vanessa stood up first. The doctor looked past her, straight at me. You're listed as his healthcare proxy, he said. We need your consent for the procedure. The room went silent in a way that felt louder than any sound. Vanessa's face changed from grief to something sharper. That's impossible, she said. I'm his wife. According to our records, ma'am, this directive was never updated. Legally, it's still active. I looked at her, and for the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel like the woman Daniel left behind. I felt like the only person in that room who actually knew him. They let me back to see him before the procedure. He was pale, tubes running everywhere, but his eyes found mine the second I walked in, and he didn't look surprised. He looked relieved. You came, he whispered. They called me. I'm still your proxy, apparently. He almost laughed, then winced. I never changed it. I told myself I would. I never did. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to ask 100 things. But a nurse said we had 5 minutes, and 5 minutes isn't enough for 3 years of silence. There's something in my desk, he said instead. Top drawer, locked. The key's under the blue mug. You need to see it before Vanessa does. Then they wheeled him away, and I stood there holding a sentence that felt like the beginning of something I wasn't ready for. I didn't go home. I drove straight to the house I used to live in, the house that now had Vanessa's wind chimes on the porch and a welcome mat that wasn't mine. I still had a spare key from years ago, tucked in an old coat pocket I'd never cleaned out. I told myself I was only getting the drawer. Nothing else. The blue mug was exactly where it always was. Some things, apparently, Daniel never let go of. Inside the drawer was a folder, thick, worn at the edges like he'd opened it 100 times. On top was a letter with my name on it. Not Vanessa's, mine. The letter was dated 4 months after our divorce was finalized. If you're reading this, something happened to me, and I need you to know the truth before anyone else gets to it first. My hands were shaking as I kept reading. Daniel wrote that Vanessa's family had approached him within weeks of our split, not out of grief, not out of love, but because her father's construction company was drowning in debt and Daniel's assets looked like a lifeline. He wrote that he married her under pressure from people who had already started drafting documents to merge his accounts with theirs the moment the ring went on. But here's what he never told her. He'd moved everything that mattered. The college fund for our son Eli, the deed to the lake property his own father left him, into an irrevocable trust before the wedding. In my name, as trustee. She thinks she married into money, he wrote. She married into a house of paper. Everything real I protected, because deep down I never stopped being afraid of losing what actually mattered. And that was never her. It was making sure Eli never paid for my mistakes. I sat on the floor of a house that used to be mine, reading a letter that rewrote everything I thought I understood about the last 3 years, and I heard the front door open. Vanessa was home, and she was not alone. "Well," she said, standing in the doorway with a man I didn't recognize, someone in a suit who looked far too comfortable holding a briefcase at 4 a.m. I didn't realize the ex-wife made house calls. "I have a key," I said, folding the letter, not quite ready to explain why. The man beside her stepped forward. "Actually, this works out. We need her signature too, as trustee of record." My stomach dropped. They knew about the trust, and they had been planning to break it. Over the next 10 minutes, I learned more about my ex-husband's marriage than I ever wanted to know. Vanessa's family lawyer had spent months trying to locate the trust documents, hoping to have them dissolved on a technicality before Daniel's health made it too late. They assumed the trustee was some anonymous bank official. They never imagined it was me. "You're going to sign this," the lawyer said, sliding papers across the kitchen island. The same island where Daniel and I used to eat cereal on Sunday mornings a lifetime ago. "It's a simple release. Nothing to worry about." I didn't touch it. "I think I'll wait," I said, "until Daniel wakes up and tells me himself what he wants." Vanessa's expression cracked for just a second, long enough for me to see that underneath the anger was fear, real fear. The kind that comes when a plan built on someone else's silence suddenly runs into someone who won't stay quiet. Daniel came out of surgery successfully 2 days later. The first thing he asked for before his own mother was whether I'd found the drawer. When I told him what happened at the house, he didn't look shocked. He looked like a man who'd been braced for this moment for 3 years and was almost grateful it had finally arrived. "I should have told you the truth the day I signed those papers," he said. "I was ashamed. I let her family push me into a marriage to save a business that was never mine to save, and I told myself protecting Eli's future quietly was enough. It wasn't. You deserve to know why." I didn't forgive him in that hospital room. Some things take longer than a conversation, but I did call the lawyer back the next morning, and I told him the trust wasn't going anywhere. Not because of anger, not because of revenge, but because for 3 years, a scared man had been quietly protecting the one thing that mattered more than any of us, our son's future. And when Eli turns 25, he'll never know how close it came to disappearing. He'll only know that somehow it was always safe.